Hello, and welcome to Leadership as Listening. This is part 2 of the first workshop in a 6-workshop series that I, Nicole Perry, am presenting in partnership with the United Cultures of Canada Association. We're presenting these workshops under the project Promoting Newcomer Mental Health through Education and Community Service. And we want to acknowledge the gracious support of Family and Community Support Services for this project. In the spirit of reconciliation, I'd also like to acknowledge that we are gathered to learn and share on Treaty 6 land. And I would like to add in a disclaimer that this workshop has been developed for educational purposes alone. It's not intended to be a substitute for therapy or professional medical advice. For those of you who have already watched the first workshop, you'll already be familiar with me. But for those of you who haven't, I'll just share briefly. I'm a registered psychologist, and I specialize in shame, resilience, healing trauma, and setting boundaries. My work with clients is collaborative, and I try to approach it with warmth and curiosity in order to help work through difficult experiences. And that warmth and curiosity is a little bit of what I believe goes into listening, or maybe a lot of what goes into it. We'll be diving more into that today. So we've started talking about mental health, and that may have you wondering, as community leaders, what's your role in terms of supporting mental health? Well, from my perspective, it may involve listening. Of course, believing the person who's talking about what they're feeling and what they experience to be happening. We're not trying to interrogate or, find the truth of a situation, but more believe what their experience is. We may be offering support, which could look like offering information, helping them navigate a difficult system to navigate. So that wayfinding assistance, whether they want to access mental health counseling, police or justice services, etc. Now, those are just some of my ideas. I wonder if any of you have other ideas about what you see your role is in the community in terms of mental health support. If you do, take a moment to reflect on that or write down your answer. Now, of course, in order to really define our roles, we also need to understand what our role is not. So again, we want to think our role is not to provide therapy, right? We're not psychologists or counselors. We're not providing medical advice. And of course, our role is not to have all of the answers. This means that we don't have to know what the person needs to do next. It's not our job to tell them what they should do. And it's also not our job to define their experience for them. So, for example, we don't need to tell them, oh, you're definitely depressed. Oh, you've been traumatized, because we don't know that without a proper assessment by a qualified professional, and that's not our role. Now I'd like to invite you to reflect, if one of our main roles as a leader is to listen, what is it that makes a good listener? And in order to get good answers here, I thought I'm going to invite each of you to first think of a time where you really felt heard and understood. It could be by a therapist, but it really could be anyone in your life where you felt was trying to listen to you and understand you. And as you think about that person and that experience, I'd like you to reflect on or write down, what qualities did that person have? What is it that they said or did to really help or support the experience of being understood? Now I'd like to invite you to think of a time that was less positive, a time when you did not feel particularly heard or understood. And as you think of that experience, again, it doesn't have to be particularly bad, but just you didn't quite feel heard and understood. Notice what went wrong. What happened that maybe got in the way of that person being able to be a good listener for you in that moment? And as you reflect on that, hopefully that will start to form a picture in your mind of some of the qualities that make a good listener. Now, if it's not already clear, I see a strong connection between leadership and listening. As Brené Brown says, a brave leader is someone who says, I see you, I hear you, I don't have all the answers, but I'm going to keep listening and asking questions. And we focus on listening because as someone in a position of trust, you will likely be the first point of contact for someone who's really struggling in your community. If that person in your community feels really heard and supported, they may be more likely to take additional steps for their mental health, including possibly seeking professional support as well. Now we know that's important because of the prevalence of mental health issues. I'm taking this statistic from Seaglass Psychology. I think it was posted in 2021, where she indicated that 24% of Canadians said they needed mental health services to cope with the COVID-19 pandemic in the past 12 months, but were unable to receive them. So not only are we that first point of contact, but often you might be that person's main source of support while they're still waiting to access services or navigate their way through what can be a challenging system. Now, of course, ultimately, if there is a bigger issue, we'd like to help connect them with trained professional, but still, in terms of the listening, that may involve a lot of prevention to help get things proactively before the person is really in crisis. Okay, so what do I mean when I'm talking about listening? Well, I always liked this handout that I received from the Victoria Sexual Assault Center while I was going through their training to be a volunteer. And they say, first of all, you are not listening when you say you understand before you know me well enough. You don't care about me, and you can't care about me until you know something about me to care about. You're not listening when you get excited and stimulated by what I'm saying and want to jump right in before I invite your response. You're trying to sort out all the details of my story instead of the feelings behind my words. You have an answer for my problem before I've finished telling you what it is. You cut me off before I finish speaking. You finish my sentence for me. You tell me about your experience, which makes mine seem unimportant. You're disturbed by my loaded words or abusive language. You sense that my problem is embarrassing and you want to avoid it. You are communicating with someone else in the room while I'm talking. You need to feel successful in helping me. And you refuse my thanks by saying you haven't really done anything. On the other hand, you are listening when you come into my private world and let me be me. You really try to understand me when I do not make much sense. You grasp my point of view even if it goes against your sincere convictions. You don't tell me that the exact same thing happened to you last week. You allow me to make my own decisions even when you feel I'm wrong. You don't take my problem from me, but trust me to deal with it on my own. You give me enough room to discover for myself why I feel upset, and enough time to think for myself what's best for me. You hold back your desire to give me your good advice. You accept my gift of gratitude by telling me it's good to know that you were there for me. You tell me you're glad I contacted you. What does listening involve? Well, I have noticed that often when people are trying to address this question, through presentations like this, we focus on teaching specific skills like open and closed questions, these sorts of validating and reflecting. But I think we want to get really what is at the heart of good listening. To me, it's about giving space for the person to talk without judgment of their feelings and experiences, allowing all feelings to be present. Now, from a psychologist perspective, there really is no right or wrong emotion, good or bad. Instead, we see emotions as important signs to listen to and pay attention to. Often, our emotions help us know what we need and understand when it's time to take action. They can be clues to situations that are not just and that we may need to do something to change. Giving permission to express. We can do this for the person by giving nonverbal cues like nodding, showing care through our facial expression, as well as verbal cues like, I hear you, it's okay to cry. And just really allowing that person space to express themselves in their own way. Listening also involves being present and attentive. I share this because I think people might be helped to be reminded that you don't necessarily need to say too much in order to be a support for someone. Attending to the person and their experience shows respect, interest, and care. When you pay attention, you can focus on what the person is saying and experiencing rather than getting lost in thinking about what you would do in a similar situation or what you think they should do. Giving our full attention to their experience in this way can be huge. So, what gets in the way of this heart of listening that I'm talking about? Well, some common communication barriers include distractions. So, for example, other people walking into the room, our phone is ringing, etc. So, in order to help support communication, I encourage that if it feels okay for both of you to close the door for privacy, put your phone on silent, and make sure your own physical needs are already taken care of. That you've had the chance to eat or grab water so that you aren't getting distracted by those needs later on. Having patience as well can help. So I know that people can feel stuck for long periods of time, and it's important for us to remember that change is a process. What often gets in the way is we get tied to a particular outcome. This person needs to access a particular type of support. They need to stop drinking. They need to talk with their mother. And yet we really know that even if the person themselves knows what they want to do or, what would be best for their mental health, it takes time for that to happen. Okay, another communication barrier would be giving too much information. This can be overwhelming for someone who might be already in emotional distress. And while often we have good information as well as good advice, we want to focus on one small step if the person is ready for that step or that information. If not, they can always come back for it another time when they're feeling more able to hear it. And finally, pre-planning what you're going to say or thinking about your response can get in the way of really actually hearing what the person is saying now. I know some people worry about not saying or doing the right thing, and so I try to reassure folks that you don't need to have the perfect words. It's your presence, which the person will feel in their body, that's really the most important part. Okay, other communication barriers involve when we start directing a person, what we think they should do, right? Or what's the right thing to do, quote unquote, warning or admonishing them about a particular action, like you better think twice about that, or trying to tell them what the consequences will be. Advising, giving solutions or suggestions, especially when that advice is not asked for or wanted. We often jump to this, the advising, in order to try to take away the pain that someone's in, and yet it can miss the mark if the person really just wants to be heard and understood and allowed the space to come up with their own answers, which may be entirely different than our answers. And that's kind of what I meant before. If we go back here and think about being tied to a particular outcome, we may see what we think would be the best course of action for us in this scenario, but that doesn't mean it's the best course of action for the person in front of us. Similarly, a communication barrier of lecturing or teaching, that can even come from a well-meaning place of, here's some information about depression, or here's what you need to know about accessing the support. And if that has not been asked for, it may not be welcome. Judging, criticizing, or blaming. This might come up with statements like, what would your family think if you did this? Right? No wonder you're experiencing this with what you've done. Right? Usually people, when they're coming from support, they already feel a lot of self-judgment and self-blame. So we don't need ours on top of that. Now, this is easier said than done, because of course we have our own biases and our own experiences that are often brought up when someone is talking with us. So how can we stay out of judgment? Well, the first thing is to notice it, right? If you do feel a judgment come on or hear that voice in your own mind, because sometimes they sneak in. We're not perfect, we are human. And so when those judgments arise, just note it down. And then you can always come back to reflect on it yourself or with a trusted colleague or person you know after the conversation is done. Kind of wondering, I wonder what that brought up in me, or what happened there that I was coming from judgment. We can stay curious, both about our own experience of what's happening in the moment, but here I primarily mean curious about what the other person is going through. It's easier to stay out of judgment if we're really wondering, I wonder what makes them think in that way, or what's leading them to say these things, right? And seeing if we can have that openness and curiosity to what that person might be experiencing. If we focus on just reflecting back what we've heard them say, it helps us get out of what we're thinking about or judging around what they'll say. So for an example, reflection might be, it sounds like da-da-da, or I hear you saying that, right? And this gives us something to focus on, as I said. And then finally, validating. Practice validating by saying things like, it's okay to feel that way. It's okay not to have the answers. You can kind of say that one to yourself too. It's okay for me to not know what the person's next steps need to be. Everything that's showing up is okay and normal and human. So now for those of you who are going to come to the live workshop with me, we'll get a chance to practice this with each other, this non-judgmental listening without advice giving. But for those of you who are watching this on your own, I'm going to invite you to try this out in your day-to-day life, right? What is it like if you just focusing on hearing and understanding the other person? And I'll be interested to hear what that ends up being like for each of you.